Hi everybody, how we doing? So I'm here today anyway because I'm teaching this class on Tuesdays from 4 to 7. So the way this came about was last spring I was part of this debate with Deepak Chopra where Leonard Mlodinow and I debated Deepak and Stuart Hameroff on quantum consciousness and the nature of reality and all this good stuff, with a bunch of other people on stage, and it was quite the show. And so your chancellor, who was orchestrating the whole thing, invited me to teach a class here, sort of on a whim. And I think I surprised him when I said, "Okay, I'll do it. If I can teach anything I want." And he said, "Yeah, you can teach anything you want." So I created Skepticism 101. How to think like a scientist without being a geek. Anyway, it's a part of my long-term program of developing a skeptical curriculum for teaching critical thinking and scientific studies, but calling it something else, calling it skepticism, and using all the tools that we've developed over the last 20 years at the Skeptic Society and Skeptic Magazine on belief in different claims, things like Bigfoot and UFOs and ESP and psychics and astrology and you name it, we study it, as sort of a gateway drug into science for students. That is, most of the students, most people I encounter are interested in the topics. Lost continent of Atlantis and aliens from other planets and all these kinds of things that are they really are interesting and fun to study. And it's a tool to think about how we know if any of these things are true or not. And then that gets us into asking how we know anything is true, and that's what science does better than any other instrument ever devised as a reliable method of understanding the world. So what I would like to do in the long run is nationally and internationally produce an entire curriculum of teaching skeptical courses, which is actually already being done. So it's just really kind of coalescing what hundreds of professors around the world are already doing. I know because they write me all the time and ask for permission to use articles from Skeptic Magazine in their various classes that are called different things. Science studies, critical thinking, the psychology of belief, science and pseudoscience, science and religion, the philosophy of science, and so on. So they're all in these different departments and different branches. So I thought it would be interesting if we could have in one location at skeptic.com a resource base in which we have hundreds or even thousands of documents, lectures, PowerPoint lectures and slides, videos, magic tricks, illusions, and all manner of different things that professors are already using, and just put them there. And if you want to teach your own class on Skepticism 101 or 102 or 204 or whatever, you just download all this stuff for free, piece together, and tailor it to your own department, your own wishes, whatever you want to do. And that way we can, I think, further the skeptical movement into more mainstream academia. There is a pretty large, sizable skeptical movement that's been going on for the last half century that really started with Martin Gardner's columns in Scientific American and his books on pseudoscience back in the 1950s and 60s, that then picked up with The Amazing Randi and others when psychics like Uri Geller were pretty popular in the 70s. And so it was a way of kind of taking it to the street as public intellectuals to combat irrationalism and unreason and anti-intellectualism and anti-science and pseudoscience in popular culture, which is where the problem lies. Right out there in public. So we've pretty much mastered that domain. And thanks to the internet and Facebook and the meetup groups and so on, there's skeptical communities all over the world. Doesn't matter where I go, hundreds show up for my talks just by tweeting or Facebook meetup group, drinking at the pub groups, these kinds of things. And so that's all there. So that's really why I'm doing this. So I thought I'd come talk to you about a little bit of what I do, just in case you might be interested in teaching Skepticism 101, in case I don't do it next year. So I only teach part-time. I'm just an adjunct here for just this one semester. I don't know if I'll do it again. We'll see. And I teach then in the spring in Claremont, just one year at a time and see how it goes. And that's a graduate level class on evolution economics in the brain. It's just sort of a integrative course that I teach with Paul Zak through their transdisciplinary studies. But my main day job is publishing Skeptic magazine and putting on a science lecture series at Caltech for the Skeptic Society. For example, our next event is this coming Sunday that I would like to invite you all to. It's just up in Pasadena. It's a short drive, I know, because I make it every Tuesday. And on Sundays, you won't have any traffic. It's 2 o'clock in Beckman Auditorium. You can just show up, or you can go online and at skeptic.com and order your tickets. Steve Pinker has a new book out called The Better Angels of Our Nature: Why Violence Has Declined. It's one of the most important books I've ever read. It's an 800-page masterpiece of data and narrative account of the last 10,000 years. Sort of a Jared Diamond-esque masterpiece, and so he is lecturing for us that this coming Sunday. We do a lot of these different talks. I've got Daniel Kahneman speaking on November 6th on thinking fast and slow. Kahneman's the Nobel Prize winner in economics, the first psychologist to ever win a prize, short of maybe Conrad Lorenz, who was really more of a biologist. So that's on that time. Then Robert Trivers is the discoverer, or inventor, if you will, of kin selection and inclusive fitness and reciprocal altruism in evolutionary theory. This is one of the most important ideas of the last, well, really since Darwin, to explain why we would ever be nice and moral to anybody else in a Darwinian selfish gene framework. And it's Bob who figured out how to build morality from the bottom up, brick by brick, to show why we would be moral. True morality, not from the top down, as everybody always thought it was given, but from the bottom up. Anyway, so that's on November 13th. And then Michael Gazzaniga on November 20th on the illusion of free will and how to get around this problem. You know, this is the guy that scans people's brains and has them do tasks inside the MRI brain scanner with a little keypad where you have to press the left key or the right key depending on the choices that are given. And it looks like the choices are being made for your conscious brain by your subconscious brain way, way down the pathway, about 400 to 500 milliseconds before you're even aware of it. So when you say, I consciously chose to press the left button, no, you actually didn't. So somebody else did. Well, but what does that even mean? Because it's still inside you making the choice. So anyway, he's going to explore those ideas. So I would invite you to attend any and all of those. They're a lot of fun. Okay, so this is the magazine. It's the quarterly publication of the Skeptic Society. We investigate claims that paranormal, pseudoscience, fringe groups, and cult of all kinds between good science, junk science, bad science, voodoo science, pathological science, non-science, and plain old nonsense. So when you join the society, you get as a benefit of membership the subscription to the magazine. We also give you the decoder ring to tell you what the Da Vinci Code really means. It's a novel. He just made it up. But you'd be amazed at what people actually think about novels and stuff that people just make up. So each one has a theme to it. Like we did one on the future of intelligence here. Are people getting smarter or dumber? By the way, those of you in the back, if you can't see that, it's right here. The laser pointer? Okay. Well, being from Los Angeles myself, I have an opinion on this question, but it turns out people, in fact, are getting smarter. The so-called Flynn Effect IQ scores are going up about 3 points every 10 years since World War I, since they started systematically measuring intelligence. And it's not just in any of the areas. In fact, it's not in the culturally influenced areas of the IQ test. It's in the most abstract reasoning, the matrices, for example, and the similarity sections of the IQ test. 3 points every 10 years. So this is good news in terms of like the spread of scientific thinking, because scientific thinking is abstract reasoning, so it could be we can bump it up through that. Anyway, there's much disagreement about the cause of this, so we had a discussion of that. We did one on artificial intelligence. When will computers achieve human-level intelligence? And we concluded that we're 5 years away, and always will be. This last weekend I was in New York for the Singularity Summit. This is the singularitarians, Ray Kurzweil, and these visionaries who project that the singularity is coming in 2029. The singularity is the point at which computers achieve human-level intelligence and go vastly beyond it. and we'll hit an intellectual event horizon beyond which we cannot see and project, and we will achieve immortality, and life will be grand and utopian. You can imagine I'm skeptical of this whenever. I like these guys. You know, they asked me my position. I was one of the speakers. They asked me my position on immortality, and I said, I'm for it. But the fact that I'm for it doesn't make it true. And I'm always skeptical. My baloney detection alarm goes off whenever the prophet prophesizes that the big thing is going to happen in his lifetime, and we are the chosen people who get to go to the other side. That's always what they say, and they've always been wrong. So the Copernican principle that we're not special probably is the case. You know, I keep an open mind, but I'm certainly skeptical about those things. So we'll see if they get there. I mean, there was with some irony amongst all this talk of this highfalutin talk about the wonders and powers of iPhones and the internet and computers, and how we're just this close to, you know, this amazing breakthrough. When one of the speakers, who had a bunch of these little baby robots that were like a swarm intelligence that were all on the stage, he couldn't get them to work because the wireless system was interfering with the robot's communication, and nobody could figure out how to turn off the wireless system in the room. When they finally figured that out after like an hour, somebody else had a wireless microphone on. They couldn't figure out if that was causing the problem. Anyway, I thought it was just too ironic that they couldn't even make it work. Anyway, so we're a long ways away from that. Was 9/11 a conspiracy? We deal a lot with the 9/11 truthers. But in fact, 9/11 was a conspiracy. 19 members of Al-Qaeda plotting to fly planes into buildings without telling us ahead of time constitutes a conspiracy. But that's not what the truthers think. They think it was an inside job by the Bush administration. I notice we're in the Bush hall here, so let me just say that the reason we know it was not orchestrated by the federal government was because it worked. We do a lot on climate change, global warming. Are you a global warming skeptic, or are you skeptical of the global warming skeptics? Which would make you a global warming believer, which is a weird concept in science, because we don't really have beliefs in science like you believe in liberal democracy, or you believe in equal rights, or something like that. That's different than I believe in gravity, or I believe in evolution, or I believe in global warming. Yet that's how people treat it. They mistakenly conflate those two ideas of belief and then think that it's just politicized. Well, it is politicized. Science has become very politicized in the climate thing. So that's why we depend on consensus amongst experts for those of us that can't understand the computer models and the mathematical formulas that predict climate change, of which I'm one, that cannot understand it. They're very complicated. So we do depend on that, so that's why open debate on these things is good. In any case, none of that matters because the world's going to end in 2012. Okay. Oh, by the way, what's today, the 18th? So you have 3 days to repent. According to Harold Camping, the world that was going to come to an end on May 21st was actually just Judgment Day. You have to recalculate when the world doesn't come to an end. So it's actually October 21st that the world's going to end. So you had between May 21st and October 21st to repent. So you got three days. That's it. Of course, you know what's going to happen after October 21st is October 22nd. And after 2012 comes 2013. That's the history of these things. So I just give you until it's time to go. Just sort of a brief overview of my theory behind all this, why people believe such things, and how science works as the best reliable tool we have for understanding the world. And so this is how I actually begin my course, Skepticism 101. So in science, we search for natural explanations for natural phenomena, and we always ask the what's more likely question. That aliens traversed the vast distances of interstellar space and landed in Farmer Bob's field in Puckerbrush, Kansas to make a crop circle that says skeptic.com as a way of promoting our webpage. Or that somebody just used Photoshop to make a fake photo for me. The what's more likely question is always the one we need to be asking. And before we say something is out of this world, let's first make sure that it's not in this world. People have a tendency to think that if they cannot explain it, that it must be supernatural, paranormal, extraterrestrial, or something phantasmal. And again, we can ask them what's more likely question, that aliens traversed the vast distances of interstellar space and landed in Sacramento, California to help the governor, or that the World Weekly News just makes stuff up. Well, we have no experience of aliens landing anywhere, but we have lots of experience of people making things up. For example, are aliens coming to Earth? Are UFOs their spacecraft? And again, we can ask the what's more likely question. Do UFOs represent spacecraft from other worlds or anomalies from this world? Here is a UFO photograph from my house in Altadena, California, up in the mountains. That's downtown LA, and there's Palos Verdes there, and there's the bush at the end of my cliff. And this was photographed in 1996, 1999, when my daughter was 8, by my daughter with a little Instamatic camera. And if it looks like a Buick hubcap, that's because that's what it was. So I'm just standing off on the side doing frisbee tosses of hubcaps while my daughter and her friend were photographing these things for a TV show we did on the Family Channel, and about how to fake UFO photographs. You can watch it on YouTube. It's quite amusing. We took the photographs to professional photographers. We took them to UFO experts, and everybody proclaimed that either that they were real or that they could not be determined to be fake, and so on. And now, it's not to say that all UFO photographs are fake. They're not. Most of them are real, but real what? Real in terms of representing something that's unidentified. But again, unidentified does not mean extraterrestrial, supernatural, paranormal, or anything like that. In fact, I go so far as to say that there's no such thing as the supernatural or the paranormal. There's just the natural, the normal, and the stuff we can't explain yet. And that using fuzzy words like paranormal and supernatural, these are just linguistic placeholders until we can understand what's going on. And once we understand what's going on, it either becomes part of the natural world or it just disappears as some anomaly or some artifact of something else, and then we lose interest in it. So like when Deepak was here and he was talking about his theory of quantum consciousness with Stuart Hameroff, in which they have this idea that we can read each other's minds in some telepathic way due to the quantum entanglement of the subatomic particles inside the microtubules, inside the neurons in our heads. So when I think a thought, there's a certain sequence and pattern of neural network firings that then generate this sort of field that goes out into the entangled quantum field of your brain that makes your neurons fire in the same sequence as mine, so you have the same thought. Okay, I don't believe any of this. I don't think there's any evidence for it at all. But it's an interesting theory, and if it turned out to be true, that wouldn't prove the paranormal. All it would do would be establish some natural causal explanation for some phenomenon that would then become part of physics and neuroscience. It would not be part of the paranormal anymore. It would just disappear as a paranormal phenomenon. And that's the fate of all these claims we investigate. And that's the point of science. We just try to explain it through natural means, and if we can't, then it just goes unexplained, or we just keep working on it. For example, when cosmologists talk about dark energy and dark matter, they don't mean those as explanations for anything. They're just linguistic placeholders to call it something, because we have to talk about it, until we understand what it actually is and how it actually works mechanically, physically, naturally, and then it becomes part of the science. Otherwise, it's just a mystery. We're working on it. We're going to call it this, but that's not the explanation. So for the creationist who says, you know, the intelligent designer did it, or God did it, or whatever, that's not an explanation. It explains nothing. Any more than the psychic who says, you know, I read your mind. That doesn't mean anything. We want to, inquiring minds want to know how. How did this happen? How did the intelligent designer create DNA? This is one of their claims, that DNA is too impossible to have come about from the bottom up by natural forces, so God did it, or the designer did it. Okay, how? How did she do it? What were the forces used? Electromagnetism, gravity, some kind of weak nuclear force, some sort of molecular bonding force of, you know, what's the process? And if we don't have an explanation for that, then we don't have an explanation. It's just a mystery until we can explain it. Nevertheless, people believe, and I want to believe, you want to believe, we all want to believe all sorts of things, as the iconic poster from X-Files. So that's what my book is about. This is my latest book, in which I postulate that our brains are belief engines. That is, we're pattern-seeking primates. We connect the dots. A appears connected to B. And this is called association learning. My psychologist friends here know it doesn't get any more basic than this. You With Pavlov's dog, you ring the bell and you give him some food and he salivates. You ring the bell, you give him some food and he salivates. You ring the bell, he salivates. He's associated the bell with the food, and his body responds accordingly. That's classical conditioning. Or you stick the rat in the box and you shape him into learning how to press the bar to get his reward. The little pellet comes down the chute when he closes the switch. Now, it takes about 20 to 30 minutes to train him how to do that. Every time he gets closer, you give him a reward. He's really hungry because you haven't fed him since yesterday, which is not quite what you can do with freshman intro psych students. But you can give him a choice between a boring term paper and participating in your cool experiment, and that's how we get our subject. Anyway, so I used to do this. I spent 2 years in a lab in the 70s at Cal State Fullerton, Doug Navrick's lab. This was our high-tech computer at the time. That's the computer programming chip there. It's just a board with a bunch of wires. This was a programmable Texas Instrument calculator, which was the cutting-edge thing at the time. Now I have to explain to my students. These are what we used to call pencils, and that's a pre-Excel spreadsheet data sheet that you actually make with lines and pencils and so on. And that's my pigeon. One of our many pigeons we trained to press the left key or the right key to get rewarded. And if we gave him twice as many reinforcements for pressing the left key than the right key, would he press the left key twice as often as the right key? The answer is not quite. You have to modify the formula a little bit. In any case, if you randomly give him a reward, that is, you put him on a variable interval schedule of reinforcement that's random, then whatever he happened to be doing just before he got rewarded, he repeats. That's the very definition of reinforcement. So if he spun around once counterclockwise and touched the side wall with his wing and he got reinforced, he'll repeat that behavior. And that's called superstition. So Skinner first discovered this in the 50s. It's really easy to watch happen. And it's not just the product of having a bird brain. You can go to Las Vegas and you can watch the same phenomenon with the blackjack players and the slot machine players and so on. So I call this process patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in both meaningful and meaningless noise, of which we make two kinds of errors. False positives, or type 1 error, is believing a pattern is real when it isn't. That is, you find a non-existing pattern. Or a type 2 error, false negative, is not believing a pattern is real when it is. That is, you don't recognize a real pattern. So my thought experiment is, imagine you're a hominid on the plains of Africa 3.5 million years ago, and you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator, or is it just the wind? Well, if you believe the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator, and it turns out it's just the wind, that's a low-cost error to make, a type 1 error. On the other hand, if you believe that the rustle in the grass is just the wind, and it turns out it's a dangerous predator, you're lunch. Congratulations, you've just been given a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool early before reproducing. Thank you very much. We are the descendants of those that are more likely to make one kind of error than another kind of error. So why is that? Well, this is the little formula that patternicities occur whenever the cost of making a type 1 error is less than the cost of making a type 2 error. So this is a basic evolutionary model. It's based on Hamiltonian model of inclusive fitness that has to do with calculating the cost and benefits of helping somebody else and how much you'll get back genetically. It's patterned after that. It's trying to solve this problem. That is, assessing the difference between a type 1 and type 2 error is highly problematic, especially in split-second life and death situations. So the default position is just to assume that all patterns are real. That is, assume all patterns of all rustles of the grass are dangerous predators and not the wind. In other words, our brains evolved a cognitive heuristic, a rule of thumb that says, if you hear a rustle in the grass, assume the worst. Assume that it's something bad and avoid it. Now, why can't we get it right? Why can't we just sit there and collect more data and rationally analyze it in a slower cognitive process? And the answer is because that too will get you to be lunch. The predators are not going to wait for you to do the calculation. So we've evolved the propensity to also make snap decisions, instinctive, rapid cognitions, as Kahneman calls them. I introduced you to Kahneman earlier. He calls that the sort of first type of thinking, rapid thinking, instinctive thinking. Most of our decisions are made that way until we can make the shift to a type 2 thinking, a slower, more deliberative cognitive process. That takes time, It's harder, it takes some education, you gotta force people to do that. But evolution gave us this sort of snap decision making. So there was a natural selection for the cognitive process of assuming that all patterns are real and that all patternicities represent real. An important phenomenon, we are the descendants of those most likely to do that. Anyway, I have some fun examples of patternicities. These are finding meaningful patterns in random noise. What's that look like? That's right, a horse. A horse, of course, unless the horse is a frog. So getting conflicting data of the models in your brain of what horses look like and what frogs look like leads you into this kind of shifting back and forth between one model and the other. How about here? What do you see? How about now? It's a cow, right? So by giving you the outline, I've primed your brain. It's called cognitive priming, giving you a model to interpret the data, such that when I go back, the data now are filtered through that particular model. So we know from the history of science that it's rare in any science that the data just speak for themselves. They always have to be interpreted through some model, paradigm, worldview, bias, whatever you want to call it, theory, hypothesis. And so it's always a delicate balance between data and theory and how we process those things. And so therefore our minds are always involved in the process of understanding, no matter what the data are. How about here? The classic Dalmatian illusion, of course. And once you get the prime, there it is. How about here?
UFO.
A UFO, or the planet Saturn, or some people see a hat. How about here? Yeah, this one's a little harder because there's nothing there. This is a random series of dots. So if you saw something, see me afterwards. It means a problem with your brain. No. It turns out that if you put subjects in an environment of uncertainty or it produces some anxiety, they feel out of control, they're more likely to see a meaningful pattern in this illusory series of dots than others. So that gets us to the relationship between control, superstition, and patternicity. My favorite example, this is first discovered by the anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski in the Trobriand Islanders, who found that the more uncertain the environment was when they were hunting and fishing, the more superstitious rituals they employed to deal with that anxiety. Baseball players are notoriously superstitious. All athletes are notoriously superstitious. But baseball is a good example because it's the batters who are superstitious, not the fielders. But of course, if you know the game, you know it's the same people. Wade Boggs was notorious for his superstitious rituals. Before every game, he had to have a dish of chicken. He had so many chicken recipes that he even wrote a book, published a book called Foul Tips. Foul tip, you know. Anyway. But only when he was batting. These rituals were mostly related only to when he was batting. Fielders are successful in baseball 90-95% of the time. They almost always successfully field the ball. Rarely do they make errors. On the other hand, batters fail 7 out of 10 times. The best batters fail 7 out of 10 times. The difference between a minor leaguer and a Hall of Famer is 1 hit per 10 at-bats. The difference between batting 200 and 300, that is 200 hits out of 1,000 versus 300 hits out of 1,000, or 1 out of 10, is the difference between making the Hall of Fame and not even playing in the big leagues. It's so hard to hit a throw in baseball that the players develop all kinds of rituals and superstitions because they fail so much. We know that this propensity for patternicity also occurs more in the right hemisphere than the left hemisphere. Peter Bruegger, for example, a psychologist, found that significantly more meaningful patterns were perceived in the right hemisphere via the left visual field. This is one of these split brain experiments. Than in the left hemisphere via the right visual field. As my friend and former hero said, Carl Sagan in Dragons of Eden, the Pulitzer Prize winning book, there's no doubt that right hemisphere intuitive thinking may perceive patterns and connections too difficult for the left hemisphere. But it may also detect patterns where none exist. Skeptical and critical thinking is not a hallmark of the right hemisphere. So we can, on a rough, or as a rough back of the envelope order of magnitude estimation of the division of labor in our skulls, divide things up between the right hemispheric, holistic, intuitive, creative, art and music processes versus the left hemisphere, analytic thought, logic, language, science, and math, so on. This is a kind of a gross exaggeration. It's not quite this simple. It's much more complicated than that. But roughly speaking, the patternicities are more likely to occur because of that rough division of labor. We also know through research by Peter Brugger and his colleague Christine Moore, who subjected subjects to L-DOPA. L-DOPA is a drug given for Parkinson's patients, quells the tremors. It produces more dopamine in the dopaminergic areas of your brain, which is directly related to learning and reinforcement, especially positive reinforcement. So dopamine seems to be very related to learning, association learning, connecting the dots. What they found after giving subjects a paper-pencil test of their propensity to believe in a lot of these things I've been talking about, ESP, psychics, Bigfoot, aliens, UFOs, the whole lot. Some score very high. They believe practically everything. Some, like me, score really low. They're skeptical of most of these claims. The dopamine, giving them L-DOPA, caused both the believers and the skeptics to significantly increase their levels of belief. But the effect was stronger on skeptics than it was on believers, which sounds counterintuitive until you think about it. If you already believe practically everything is real anyway, you're way up here. There's not far to go on the scale. If you're a 9.5 out of 10, you only have 0.5 to move up. If you're like me and you're a 1, you have a whole lot, big range to go up. So I think that's the explanation for that. And then finally, I'll make a note on, in this section here, I'll go for about 10 more minutes, then we'll stop. There's a relationship between dopamine, patternicity, and creativity and madness. I've been talking about paternicities as if they're sort of silly superstitions or patterns that aren't real. And I'll show you some examples of the face of Jesus on a tortilla, the Virgin Mary on a grilled cheese sandwich, that sort of thing. But in fact, finding new patterns is what creativity is all about. It's what scientists do. We find new patterns. That's how you win a Nobel Prize. That's how you create a new artistic genre or create some new musical style that no one else has ever thought of. You have to think of a pattern. You have to find some pattern no one else has ever seen. So how much of this should you do? Well, in my book, I have a long section in my chapter on this, contrasting Richard Feynman and John Nash. Richard Feynman on the left won the Nobel Prize in quantum physics for his work in quantum electrodynamics, in which he converted these long, complicated, really intimidating quantum physics equations into very simple Fineman diagrams. This is a Fineman diagram here in which one particle comes in, the other particle comes in, they interact and they go out, and you can visually describe these particles. There's a whole bunch of these Fineman diagrams. That particular one there is on the back of Feynman's 1976 Dodge cargo van, which he was so famous that he had these diagrams painted on his van. And one day when he was driving down Colorado Boulevard in Pasadena there near Caltech, he lived up in Altadena where I live, somebody stopped him and rolled down the window at the stop sign and said, "How come you have Feynman diagrams on your van?" He said, "Because I'm Feynman," which I thought that'd be pretty cool to be able to say that. By contrast, John Nash won the Nobel Prize in economics for his research on decision-making and game theory, and discovery of what was come to be called a Nash Equilibrium. A Nash Equilibrium is where two or more participants in a game have nothing to gain by changing their strategies, and so there becomes a stability in the game. The Cold War, a game of mutual assured destruction, is a Nash Equilibrium. I'm not going to bomb you if you don't bomb me, and I have nothing to gain by bombing you first, because a first strike will not completely wipe you out, and I'll be wiped out, and so on. And so this breaks the Hobbesian trap of the tendency to want to make that first strike in case the other guy is thinking like you. We can reach a Nash equilibrium. Corporations achieve a Nash equilibrium in prices. In an industry where the prices fluctuate wildly when the industry is young, and then they stabilize over time. You may have noticed most private universities charge pretty close to the same thing within $1,000, and it's not like all the chancellors meet on the weekend to say, what are you going to charge? They kind of know what they're going to charge, and they reach a Nash equilibrium. But as you recall from Russell Crowe's magnificent portrayal of John Nash in A Beautiful Mind, John Nash also saw patterns that were not real. patterns of government conspiracists and cabals and secret meetings and secret projects, top secret spy projects he was working on. And much more than that in the book. He got instructions from aliens, he believed in aliens, and all sorts of other things. Most of his hallucinations were auditory, not visual, but if you want to make a movie, you have to make it visual. So, but nevertheless, that, of course, is what we call paranoid schizophrenia. So the rub here is to find the right balance between being open-minded enough to see new patterns that are good, important, new, path-breaking, Nobel Prize winning, new music, new art, but not so open-minded that your brains fall out and you believe every wacky idea that comes down the pike, and there's a lot of them. And so that's what science does better than anything else. Science is designed to help us weed out the false patterns from the true patterns. It's the only reliable method we have. Without that, it's just my opinion against your opinion. It's my cognitively biased, loaded brain against your cognitively biased, loaded brain. My opinion versus yours, and there's no way to settle it. So as flawed as science is, at least it's a method to actually test it. And therefore, I think that's our best hope for getting past this trap of this patternicity that our brains tend to see. Thank you.